This is Rugby Unity. I am David Pembroke, and today it's just Eddie Jones. Now, by saying that, I don't mean just Eddie Jones, but Ewan McKenzie was due to join us, but there are 100-kilometre-hour winds down on the Great Ocean Road, and trees are coming down and all sorts of things are whipping through the paddock. So he has had to go and attend to his paddock. But as I say, Eddie Jones joins me from Japan. But before I speak to him, a few questions, or not questions, but comments from you, the third voice of Rugby Unity. Wayne Rockman on YouTube. Eddie is quite right that World Rugby wants to take the scrum out of the game in order to neutralise the box in that area. Next thing, kicking will also be taken out. More sleepless nights for World Rugby. Gary Emery says, "Hi, David. Thank you for uploading yet another informative and impartial edition of Rugby Unity. Yourself and Ewan discuss important issues facing rugby union without using sound bites." Duster Diesel says, nice show, thanks. R360 attempts to pull players away from their national team, then it's going to struggle. It may pull end-of-career players and not selected players, but spectator support for those will be unprofitable, I think. And finally, from Druxus on YouTube, as a recent rugby fan, this podcast is quickly becoming one of my favourites. Great work. I live in Puerto Rico, where rugby is pretty much non-existent, and I've never been attracted to the NFL, but rugby really has got me hooked so far. I've wondered, since NFL games are taking place around Europe, are people there attracted in any numbers to those games, or is it just noise and a cash grab? Honestly, to me, rugby is way superior, and I would be really surprised if people in places like England, France, or even Australia preferred the NFL over it, but perhaps other commentators can also let us know. So, Druxus, I understand that certainly the NFL are pushing hard into overseas territories. They recently played at Croke Park in Dublin, and it was packed. And I think pretty much every game that they play overseas is packed, and it's attracting lots of attention, which is, I think, a very good thing. And they do come to Australia next year and will be playing at the MCG. The LA Chargers, one team, and the second team not yet named. So, Eddie Jones, before just coming on to the program, the breaking news being reported by the Daily Telegraph in Sydney is that Rugby Australia has paid a $100,000 release fee for Carter Gordon to leave the Gold Coast Titans in the NRL to return to rugby union. What is your immediate reaction to that news?
Well, first, if the Daily Telegraph said it's probably right. As a Sydney Morning Herald, I'd have a question mark over it. Well, it's good to see him back, mate. You know, he's a good young kid. I had the honour of coaching him in 2023. Yeah, he had a difficult World Cup, but he was learning about himself. And I think, you know, those young tens, you got to invest in them. Going to rugby league's probably allowed him to develop his game even more and develop a learning about himself more. I'm sure he's experienced a lot of good, tough training that'll help him become a better rugby player. So it's great news for Rugby Australia, but really good news for Carter himself, I think.
So just in terms of that type of training and the exposure that he would have had, he's had a major injury this year and he hasn't played pretty much at all, and he's only now come back to fitness. But what are the benefits and the impacts? Because if you look at Mark Nwanga-Nitawase, physically he's been transformed by his time at rugby league, and he looks a much bigger, much stronger, much faster player. Is the conditioning in rugby league so much different to the conditioning in rugby union?
Well, there's two different games, mate. You know, rugby league, the average ball in play is 55 minutes, which makes it a reasonably continuous game, whereas rugby union is a completely discrete game. Average of 35 minutes ball in play. The average phase of the ball is 30 seconds in rugby. So it's, you know, rugby's a very stop-start, and obviously we've got some serious like body weight contests in scrum and and mauling, which they don't have in rugby league. If you look at rugby league and rugby union as two sports, like rugby league is virtually a vertical game. You know, most of the games played with players in an upright position. Very rarely they get in a lower horizontal position, whereas rugby is generally played in a lower horizontal position. So two different sorts of games. So the conditioning for the games is completely different. But you know, the thing that Australia historically has been able to borrow from rugby league is that really tough physical conditioning, which the league do obviously at a level higher than rugby because they have to, and that can give rugby teams an advantage. And it was, as you said with Mark, like Mark again, he was in the 2023 team, and he just didn't have the conditioning to play hard for 80 minutes or more than play 35 minutes. Now you see him at the Roosters; he can go for 80 minutes, and you're right, he looks stronger, looks more agile. And the Roosters done a great job with him.
What about the way that rugby is developing at the moment? You and Mackenzie made the point the other day that perhaps greater robustness at 10 is going to be important, and he sort of drew a line through Australia at the moment through, you know, the number 10s who are available at the moment, you know, the Tom Liners, Noah Lolesios. You know, it's a hard, physical, tough position, and increasingly so. So is it your view that that style of player, that bigger, more robust, stronger type of number 10 is likely to be preferred, or is it probably a better body shape for the number 10 rather than the lighter, sort of smaller player?
Yeah, I wouldn't go as far as what Ewan said, because I think that changes, and the game can change quite quickly. Certainly at the moment, where you see most of the tries scored from short range. You know, most of the tries are either short range, pick and go, one pass. You know, we're seeing a lot of that sort of attack. But the other area then is as we've seen with South Africa, when the ball goes in the air, and aerial contests have gone up to probably be the second major contest in the game. And then your lighter, smaller, whippet type players become so much more invaluable because there's more space in those situations. So, yeah, I wouldn't go as far as what Ewan said, but it's a valid point.
So last year, Joseph Akuso Su'ali'i was available for selection at the end of the rugby league season, and without playing for his provincial team, New South Wales, was selected and went on the tour and played very well, particularly the starring role in that important win over England. Would you select, if he was available, would you select, and fit, would you select Carter Gordon to go on the end of season tour in November to Europe?
Well, you don't know he's fit, mate, because he hasn't played a lot of sport. So you'd have a big question mark about that. And you'd also be thinking for his development, he'd be better off having a pre-season in rugby now, train with his Super Rugby team before then have a good Super Rugby team and be eligible for the Wallabies after that. So I'd probably say no. He's better off having a pre-season.
Okay, and why is that different to, say, Su'ali'i, where they did take him last year? Do you think that was the right decision to take him away last year? Because certainly on the field straight away he made a pretty big impact.
Well, Su'ali'i been playing consistently week in and week out of the Roosters. He had a very clear evaluation of what physical condition he was in, how ready he was for the game of rugby league, and we knew he had a background in rugby union. We knew he played rugby a lot as a young kid up until the age of 15, 16. So there was very little risk in taking him on tour. You know, he's fit, he's ready to play, he's game ready, he knows the game. Whereas Carter's, you know, coming off of quite a serious injury from what I believe. You don't know how much work he's done. and his readiness to play might be far less than what Swaley's was.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so that is big and breaking news. But what I did want to do is to start the program by I asked Ewan McKenzie the other day to give us on Monday to give us his assessment of the Rugby Championship and to pick out the bits of what he observes through the Rugby Championship as the game of rugby, as it always does, continues to evolve and to develop. So as somebody who has watched it closely, as somebody who is now preparing to play rugby against the teams in the Rugby Championship, or certainly playing against Australia in a couple of weeks, then the following weekend you're playing South Africa. So your views on the Rugby Championship and what you saw in this year's Rugby Championship?
Well, firstly, I think as a spectator, which I was watching at the start of the championship, I thought the rugby was fantastic. You know, we saw different sorts of games, highly contestable kicking games, some free-flowing games. I thought the rugby was really outstanding. I thought towards the end and particularly the last round and maybe the second last round that level of intensity dropped off a little bit, and the games weren't of good a quality and weren't as watchable as the games were in the first round. So that's one point.
Yeah.
Secondly, I reckon the three things that stood out for me was how important the aerial contest is becoming. Like, you know, your ability to kick contestable out of your own half, win the ball in the opposition half, then gives you a double possession. You know, and you've done virtually little work to get up the field, and now you're attacking against generally speaking, a disorganised defence, which I think South Africa towards the end had got that down, you know, to again be part of their DNA. It's always been part of their DNA, but they probably wandered away from it a tiny little bit. And they went back to it and became a very, very difficult team to beat. Aligned with that was the quality of the South African squad. I don't think any other team in the world, apart from maybe France, can now be compared to the South African depth. And aligned with that on that point is the big change in where South Africa used to hope to beat New Zealand, and now they expect to beat New Zealand. You know, I think I quoted those stats to you about the change in the winning percentage between South Africa and New Zealand. You know, it's gone from 60-40 in the history of the game to now 70-30 in favour of South Africa in the last 6 years, which is quite a considerable turnaround. So, you know, all that stuff about Scott Robertson's coaching, it's been over a long period of time. And obviously when you get those sort of trends, you know, it signals a sign that things have changed in each of the countries. And you know, that would be certainly a sign of urgency for New Zealand to look at what's happening and what's happening to their development system. You know, because all that indicates is that the development system of South Africa is operating better than the developed system of New Zealand. Doesn't mean they're better coached or they've got anything else apart from the development of the players coming through. And we know New Zealand historically have had a great development pathway for their players. So that's the second thing. And the third thing was the unreliability of the referee's decision making. I think it's got to the stage where I know a lot of coaches have lost trust in what's going on. There doesn't appear to be a clear picture of how we want the games to be refereed. You know, apart from possibly the depowering of the scrum or the importance of the scrum. I quote, the penalties are sometimes given for players sealing off, and the next 4 or 5 rucks you see the same thing and it doesn't happen. Cleaning out from the side, there's always one penalty in the game for sealing off now, and there's very rarely 2, and there's always one penalty for cleaning out from the side. It's almost like, you know, you're ticking what you've got to do. You know, have you cleaned the bathroom? Have you cleaned the kitchen before you left home? Did you turn the lights off, dear? Did you check the water wasn't running, dear? Or, you know, and that's what it appears to be at the moment. which is not healthy for the game, because if you're the team that gets those 2 penalties, and it can happen, then you're at a severe disadvantage. That's a 4 penalty turnaround in the game, and it puts teams at a massive disadvantage. And I just think the way that, we've got some of the referees who seem to be obsessed with just looking themselves in the screen, and watching them talk to the players, looking themselves, listen to themselves. And I don't think it's the referee's fault. I think we don't have clear direction from World Rugby about how we want the game to be, and I think that's so important. They come out about all this stuff about 250 million into USA Rugby. Well, that's fantastic, but let's get the game right. The big thing we need to get right is the game.
Yep. No, I agree with that. And let's actually go through those 3 things in a little bit more detail to give people some insights about those 3 key areas, because I think they are, there's plenty in all of those. So just going back to the aerial contest and the way that it's developing and the impact that it's having, and it's now the second most important part of the game. How are you coaching your Japanese team to take advantage of this movement towards the aerial contest, and how are you coaching your teams to defend and to be more effective in the aerial contest?
Because we're not a naturally high kicking team. We have a number 10 that doesn't play 10 for his club, so the only time he plays 10 is at national level. So that reduces our contestable kicking to a large extent off 9. So we're trying to manufacture a bit of a game that allows him to make easy decisions. I think, one of the coaching points for the young coaches out there is that when you've got a younger team that doesn't have a lot of experience, you've got to try to make the decision-making as simple as you can for them. So we're trying to develop a game that makes that decision-making a little bit easier for them on the knowledge of when, what, and how to kick. That makes sense, mate?
And then it does. But from a defensive point of view, how are you trying to become more effective? I suppose the main thing is to catch. Is to get yourself into a position where exactly where you can compete. But is there anything else that you're looking at the moment to getting support back, to the reception area where the person who's trying to catch the ball is going to get more support?
Well, I think conversely, after criticising World Rugby, I think they should be given a rap for refereeing the escort rule out, or refereeing the interpretation of escorting out of the game, where we do have a clear contest for the ball. I think that's really good. But there'll be an evolution of that. And maybe the evolution is going to come in the next evolution of escorting. Is there a better way of doing it without infracting on the laws? So we're having an investigation of that. So imagine,
Okay.
Pemby. So box kick goes up. You got your lock back there. He gets lifted, catches the ball above everyone.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you reckon that could happen?
Yeah. Well, maybe you could. But then you're probably surrendering players in a key part of the game where that might, if you're setting that person up with that support, expecting that that's going to happen, maybe you leave a weakness in another area where then the attacking team sees that you're set up for the kick and they decide to do the other thing. Because they know that you're weak around that other area.
Yeah, no, that could be true. But I think, one of the things you got to look at is changing the personnel. And the other big difference is that previously, the kicking was done on the backfield person, because now mostly it's 10 and 15 in the backfield. So you usually got 10 or 15 in the backfield, and usually you were trying to kick on top of that player. And now a lot of the teams, and particularly South Africa, are kicking in between the space between where that back defender is, back catcher is, and the front line of defence. So that catch is now having to come into a highly contested area, and it's only a short chase to the catches, And South Africa do it really well. That's the best. They use it to contest that short box kick. And it's a difficult thing to counteract. Difficult thing to counteract. So it comes down to your courage. Like, courage is such a big thing. Being able to go into that contest 100%, anticipate where the ball is, and the skill of catching. So we're doing all the work we can, but we're going to have to be maybe a little bit inventive.
Okay. So the South African team, you mentioned the quality of the squad, phenomenal, really, that they're able to, you just go through the positions. They've just got so much depth all over the place, the ability to mix and match. And I think Nick Mallett made the good point the other day that their flexibility as well. Not only do they have the players coming on, but they've got players who can play in, not just one position, but two positions and possibly three positions, which gives you even more options when you're the coach of that particular team. You make the point, but there's not much anyone can do about that. And when you see that they won the under-20s competition pretty convincingly this year, you would expect that there are only going to be more quality athletes become available over time in South Africa, given the importance of the game to the South African, to the country of South Africa, and the number of people who are playing the game. So it's not likely to end anytime soon, is it, in terms of the quality of players that they're going to have available to them?
But what's happened? That's true what you're saying. But what's happened, whether it be by default or by design? And it's a little bit hard to tell. But you think South Africa got beaten by Japan in 2015 World Cup, right? And it was the death rights of South African rugby. And they've now won 2 World Cups, and generally over the last, or particularly probably the last 5 years, have been the best team in the world. And how did that happen? What happened? What's the changes that's happened? Like, did someone get a magic wand and spray it over South Africa? So let's have a look what's changed. They've pulled out of Super Rugby. Created, had a team in the URC, changed the number of teams in their Currie Cup, so the domestic season became shorter, less teams, stronger teams playing against each other. So they got now professional players playing at Currie Cup domestically, then they can play at URC, and at URC they get to play in some of the most competitive domestic rugby in the world, because they're playing against an 80% of the island side in Leinster. Scotland's half, split between Edinburgh and Glasgow. Obviously, Wales not doing very well at the moment, but Italy have got 2 teams in that comp. So it's a reasonably high-level comp that they're playing in, so they get that experience of playing that tough, competitive, attritional type rugby, which ultimately is generally Test rugby. And then they allow their best players to play overseas, and most of their players have chosen to play in Japan. And they've got some players in Europe. So the advantages of playing in Japan is that they do a lot of quality training, and they don't have many really hard physical games, maybe, for the top players, 5 or 6 games. So they come back relatively refreshed for the Springboks. So all of those things have happened either by default or by design. Certainly pulling out of Super Rugby is by design. And now the younger players coming through are getting opportunities to play at Currie Cup quicker. They get opportunities to play at URC. And with most of their players playing overseas, those spaces are there for them.
Yeah.
So they're getting this continual flow of good players coming through, plus opportunity to play.
And good coaching and good leadership. I think, Rassie Erasmus deserves a lot of credit for what he's done, not only with the Springbok team, but my understanding is also he has an influence, throughout their system. So I'm sure, at a schoolboy level as well, you do see those YouTube clips of the games in South Africa and the enormous amount of talent that is coming through that school's pathways, and how it's a big feeder into that system that you've just outlined as well. So, South Africa, 2027, I think they're going to be extreme. They're going to be very, very hard to beat. Sure, you get to a quarterfinal, you get to a semi-final, you get to a final, a red card, a yellow card, injury, whatever, things can happen, but certainly they will have a very strong squad. But interesting, you mentioned the New Zealand development system. For the first time in living memory, or in my memory at least, the Australian under-18s or schoolboys team played New Zealand schoolboys in 2 matches last week and beat New Zealand by, huge scores. 80 points to 17, I think one of the scores was, and the other one was not too much different as well. So I just couldn't understand that they played in the final of the under-20s, but what has happened there, because that generally doesn't happen. Australia might pinch at a schoolboys level, might pinch a game, now or then, but to have 2 matches where the Australians were so dominant, maybe that says something, that the Australians are getting their pathways right and getting their system better, which I think there is an argument around that, because they have been playing under-16s national tournaments. They've been playing under-19s national tournaments, and that level of pathway, getting those games up on the TVs, that seems to be working. But do you have any idea as to why that might have happened at that schoolboy under-18 level in New Zealand, and that contest to be so uneven?
Well, firstly, I think most of the evidence shows that rugby at the under-18 level is an unreliable indicator of whether the players go on and play international rugby. It's a very low percentage go through, right. So I wouldn't get too carried away with that. But the one thing we know in New Zealand, Super Rugby has become an issue. I think there's not a person in the world that watches Super Rugby now and says, well, maybe the quality's not as good as it was before. And the New Zealand and South Australian players don't get an opportunity to play in South Africa anymore, where they were exposed to tough conditions, tough games against different opposition. It's Australia and New Zealand now, so there's and Fiji obviously. So there's that part of it. I think the Warriors now become a big ticket in New Zealand. There's no doubt. You go to Auckland now, and the biggest ticket in town is not the Auckland Blues, which used to be. It's the Warriors. So you could assume, and I've heard various stories, that a number of the young talented players now are being picked by the Warriors and obviously other NRL teams. So you wonder whether some of the talent is being diluted. And that would be a massive worry. And I think there's also been changes in New Zealand society. From what I hear, basketball's certainly become more popular. So maybe some of that talent's been diluted. And, we know in Australia it's been a constant battle to retain talent. And at the moment, again, NRL is probably more popular than the Wallabies, although obviously the Lions series would have certainly given rugby a huge impetus in Australia, and kids would be maybe starting to think maybe I should stay in rugby rather than go to rugby league. And I wonder how many of those 18-year-old players are assigned to rugby league clubs in the Australian team.
Well, I don't know, but I presume it's a lot, because a number of them are now scholarship players in Sydney at the big private schools. Each of the private schools has, well, not all of them, but most of them have a number of very talented rugby league players who do their schooling. So, but just around that, we have seen the launch of the release of the schedule for Super Rugby Pacific next year. Where to, in your mind, for Super Rugby Pacific? If South Africa's not coming back, Argentina highly unlikely. Is Japan part of the solution? Where to for Super Rugby Pacific?
Well, the difficult thing is tying which I'm not equipped to do, tying the talent development of and the commercialism together. Like if you look at Australia commercially have had to have 5 teams for Super Rugby. Talent-wise, it's spread the talent, made it less competitive to get in the Super Rugby team. So that probably hasn't been an advantage for the Wallabies. But commercially, to sell Super Rugby, they have to have 5 teams. I think, that's one of the problems. How do you get a competition that's commercially viable that also helps develop your talent, which the old Super Rugby definitely was. Definitely was. It was competitive. There was best players in each of the countries were playing against each other. But that's no longer the case. So what do? Do you bring in America? Do you bring in Japan? Realise that maybe the quality of the competition is not going to be good, but it's commercially sustaining. Or, you think from a development of talent, the best thing would be for Australia and New Zealand to play a home and away tough competition, maybe reduce the number of teams in a small comp that goes for 20 weeks. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not the right person to ask, mate.
No, but there were some improvements certainly across the board, and it will be interesting to see whether or not this sort of this halo of goodwill that's sort of sitting around the national team at the moment, even though they're not winning, there is a goodwill towards the Wallabies at the moment. Will be interesting to see what will happen post the tour to the Northern Hemisphere in terms of where fans will be if they're unable to get some wins. But let's just say that they do. Then how does that flow on to Super Rugby next year, and how do they continue the improvements that they made last year?
We're not talking rugby, we're building it. Rugby Unity.
Okay, Eddie Jones, the other big news this week was the decision of 8 of the leading major unions to come out and say that if you play for R360 or if you participate in that tournament, you can no longer play for your country. You can no longer represent your country. Certainly a strong, decisive move by the major unions against R360. When you heard that news, what was your reaction when you heard that news?
Well, 2 things. One, it was always expected that would happen. I don't think anyone expected anything else. Any rebel competition, first thing you're going to do is try to ban players, which is the history of rebel competitions. Second thing is then probably with a number of other little stories around, probably amplified the fact that maybe 360 is getting closer to being a reality. And I think it's increasingly looking like it'll be a rebel competition, and a bit like in the World Series cricket, live golf, that the older players who at the end of their careers will take the money and run, which no one could blame them for doing that. There'll be some middle of the road players come in, but most of the players who are still in the prime of their international careers probably won't go. They'll stay in traditional rugby. So we'll see if that can have a beneficial effect on the game. It'll create more opportunities for young players coming through. I've spoken before in opposition to your view. I don't think it's a bad thing for rugby. I think it could help the game. I'm not sure how, but I think the way we're operating at the moment is not sustainable. So we need something to happen, and maybe a rebel competition like this can help.
Well, perhaps it can, but let's not prosecute our individual cases because we can go disappear down another rabbit hole. But interestingly, I noticed that today George Ford, who I would have thought is absolutely cherry ripe for R360, has re-signed with his club in the Premiership with Sale. Which again, I don't know. I just don't know where it is. We just don't know enough about R360 yet as to how, in fact, they are going to present themselves. But other news today that Nelson Afosa Solomona, who has been tied to R360, has been given permission by Melbourne Storm to move on and to talk to others. And certainly the NRL executives, they had a crisis meeting yesterday between their club CEOs and Peter V'landys, the CEO of the organisation. So certainly the NRL is taking the threat of R360 seriously because more and more rugby league players are being tied to the competition. Now, there's every chance that the very active managers in the NRL are using R360 to negotiate better contracts for their players. But still, lots of activity in that space. And Len Ikitau, who's signed to play in the Premiership, has come out today as well, saying that 2027 is just too big a lure for him in Australia to give up to go to sign for R360. So he is another player that won't be available for the R360. But certainly, they go to World Rugby next year to see if they can be sanctioned as an official type of tournament. And certainly they are saying that R360 will get underway in October of next year. But anyway, we will wait and see. Some of the other news from this week, Eddie Jones, I noticed that Gregor Townsend has been appointed to work for Red Bull Rugby as an advisor for 30 days a year. Now, there are elements in Scotland who don't think that this is a good thing, that he is the Scotland coach and should be dedicating all of his time to that particular role. But personally, I think it's a fantastic opportunity for a coach. 30 days a year is not an enormous amount of time. And the opportunity to learn, to be able to work with the Red Bull organisation across the other sports, to me, it would make great sense that you would give a leading coach like Gregor Townsend that opportunity. And you have probably been the person who has done this the longest. You've been involved with Suntory for a similar probably amount of time, for 25 years, 30 years. And clearly it hasn't done you any harm to be involved with other teams. So what do you see as the benefits of these types of relationships where senior coaches are getting the opportunity to be exposed to other environments, not just the environment that they're working in?
Yeah, well, I think it just keeps you fresh, mate. Keeps you fresh and thinking and learning, and particularly with Red Bull, who have got Jurgen Klopp as their head of football. If you were able to get any times with him, and around him a number of other like highly acknowledged high performance people, it would be like the best personal development you could get, And Red Bull have shown they can move a dial. They've done well in football. They've got a team in, I think, Salzburg doing well. They've got teams in America, teams in Japan. And so for Gregor, he could be able to pick up a lot of good information from Red Bull, and it only help his coaching. I think it's just a bit narrow-minded about people saying, or you should be focusing every day. 30 days is, for an international rugby coach, nothing. Like, he'd be off. Is it all right for coaches to go and play golf in that time? No one ever criticises. But if you go and do something you actually love doing, you get criticised for it. Like, I can remember in 2003, mate, we had a break after you might remember after the Tri-Nations. I went over to spend the week in the north of island of Hokkaido at a camp with Suntory, just to have a bit of a break, relax. And they sent photographers out there to this isolated bit of land, chasing me around the training field, trying to get a shot of me. Like, it was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But if I was off playing golf, no one would have worried.
Yeah. Interestingly, also, because as long as you've been going back to Suntory over the 20 odd, 30 odd, whatever years it is that we've worked together, whenever you've come back, not that long ago when you went over there and you were coaching and you were involved with Bowden Barrett. I'll never forget the conversation we had where you were just so energized by having the opportunity to be in and around him through that role. And it was the energy of that opportunity to work with a player that you took from that opportunity, which you then obviously carried in. I think it was maybe around your time when you were sort of later in your period with England.
Yeah, no. Well, opportunity to coach guys like Bowden Barrett, Damien McKenzie, Fareed Dupree, Skulkberger, Dani Rousseau, Alame Ramia. Like, 10, 20 minutes without speaking to those guys, you pick up such great information. And hopefully it makes you a little bit a better coach. And you get to understand some of the game more, get to understand how they're thinking. And then when you're talking to other players, it becomes a source of information you can share with them.
No, good luck to him. And, and I think from a Red Bull point of view, to have someone like Gregor Townsend, who is, was such a great and accomplished player, such a very successful coach, I think it can only be good that he will be able to, bring a lot of rugby knowledge to the Red Bull organisation. And hopefully that is a very fruitful partnership for them. And it would be great to see the Newcastle Red Bulls doing well in the Prem this season. So, couple of other bits of news, Eddie Jones. Coming up to this great time of the year, you and Mackenzie and I were discussing it on Monday that, this autumn series, this autumn nations, when the South heads to the North and there are just games on everywhere, and they roll through, days, and there's an early game, there's a late game, there's a Sunday game. It's an exciting time of the year, isn't it, for rugby as we head into this time? How do you think about it when, from your point of view of developing teams and developing opportunities for players at this time? How do you think about these autumn test matches? And in the next couple of weeks, you have Australia in Tokyo, then you have South Africa at Wembley, then it goes on, for a couple of weeks after that. So just exactly how do you think about preparing your teams for these matches, which will soon become, the Nations Cup finale at the end of the season?
Well, I think, this is the last time they're in the terminology true friendlies, aren't they? Because you play these games from here on in, and they're for points, and they're just whether you stay in the top 12 or whatever. Well, I think, when you're coming from the Southern Hemisphere, when you're taking Australia up there, it's always the challenge of playing differently in those conditions. And, you don't get to play against an England side that is going to play differently. And that's always the test. How quickly can you adapt to play against those teams? And there's no bigger occasion than beating England at Twickenham, or Ireland in Aviva Stadium. So they're great occasions for the players. You get tour, you get to experience different countries, and you get to experience different rugby. And I always look at it from a World Cup point of view. It's 2 years out from a World Cup. So I want to find out by the end of the tour, I want to know about 70% of our squad who can go to the World Cup and compete and be effective. So these games give you a great litmus test for those players. And you get to see, because you're on tour and you're travelling every Sunday, you play the game Saturday, go back to the hotel Sunday, you're travelling Sunday, get in Monday. It's a tough old routine, but you got to make sure you understand how grateful you should be for having these opportunities.
Yeah. And I think from the fans' point of view as well, because obviously it's the beginning of the season in the North, and there's this excitement that builds. And I don't know, it's my favorite time of the year is being over in Europe at this time of the year, getting ready to enjoy and participate in those competitions. And I'm sure the fans will be looking forward to some tremendous matches. Your first task, though, in Saturday week is against Australia in Tokyo. What are you expecting?
Well, Australia, as we've spoken about, I think Australia's become a really good, tough, competitive team. They stay in games for long periods of time. Up until the last game against New Zealand, they played that one pass rugby a lot, but against New Zealand they shifted the ball a lot. So, Joe Smith's an excellent coach. So whenever you play against his teams, they're well prepared. They'll have a tactical angle to the way they attack, particularly probably not so much defensively, but definitely attacking wise. So we're going to have to develop a defence that can adapt to whatever Australia bring. And keep doing it for a long period of time. And, these sort of games where a high-ranked team's playing against a lower-ranked team, the key for the lower-ranked team is to stay in the game as long as possible. And then if you can get into that 60-minute mark and you're still close, then the pressure changes. Pressure goes on the higher-ranked team.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be close. What are the headlines going to be like tomorrow? So, that's our job, is to tactically create a game and physically be able to play a game where we can hang in there for a long period of time. And then when you're competing and you're there in the last 60, you don't know what can happen. And particularly with the referees today, mate, you can get 2 yellow cards in 2 minutes, and not the referees, the decision making on the game. And so that can turn the game very quickly one way or the other.
So, in terms of your preparation at the moment with the squad, are you now training today to get ready for that match against Australia, or is your training at the moment more geared towards the tour and being ready for the tour?
Well, at the ripe old age of 65, mate, I'm doing something different, which has been it's been challenging.
Okay.
We've got two squads. We've got a squad to play against Australia and a Japan 15, which I've never had two teams together. So I've got two teams. We've got one team playing the Australia A on Saturday
Australia
week.
A?
Yeah, on Saturday week.
Yep.
And then they go on and play Hong Kong after that. And then we've got one squad preparing for the Wallabies in 2 weeks' time. So we just had a meeting at 6 o'clock this morning. I think half the staff was still asleep, or maybe it was my leadership of the meeting that made them sleepy. I don't know. Where we looked at, how can we maximise the schedule for both teams, given that the team that's going to play Australia A needs to have a test week preparation, whereas the members who are playing potentially against the Wallabies have got another training week where we want to experiment, look at different sorts of things we want to do against Australia. So we tried to work out a schedule this morning that suits both teams. We've got extra staff in. We'll end up having on Monday, we'll have 48 players in camp, which is a hell of a lot of players. And probably, 30 staff. So there's a lot of people in amongst it. But we had a short meeting last night, and then a bit of a traditional Japanese food, and the atmosphere of the players was really good. They're excited about the opportunity, and they want to do something special. And it's a long time since Japan's beaten a top 8 team in the world, since last time was 2019. So we've just got this theme of let's just go for it, don't hold back, and see where we can go as a team.
Have they taken a lot of confidence out of the Pacific Nations Cup?
Not so much the pool games, but the game against Fiji. We couldn't compete against Fiji last year. And this year we competed really well, and we're probably, could have been one play away from winning the game. So that's given us a lot of confidence. And because also we've changed the way we play subtly, and the players have taken that on really well, which is an interesting thing. I was talking to someone the other day. I think the younger players now are much quicker to adapt different systems or different ideas than maybe traditionally the older players were. And they like change a lot more. So it's about how much change they can handle, but certainly we've changed things a little bit that I think will help us going forward, particularly against the top-ranked teams.
And in terms of the Japanese rugby community, how much interest do you think there will be around particularly the Wallaby match versus Japan in Tokyo, to be the match to be played at the stadium? Is it likely that there'll be, I think it's about a 60 to 70,000 seat stadium. Is it likely to be full, or is it going to attract big attention?
Yeah, well, the biggest draws here by a mile are New Zealand, mate. You know, rugby's still relatively a small sport in Japan, but I think they're hoping that I think they'd sold close to 40,000 tickets, and they're hoping to get that up to 50,000. And 50,000 in the National Stadium will be a good atmosphere. So that'll be a good result for Japan rugby. But New Zealand, you know, that the mystique of the silver fern, the mystique of the haka is something the Japanese love.
And just for people, I have told people previously, but we are taking rugby unity on the road. Our mission is of this podcast, as I've said many times, is to help secure the future prosperity of rugby union around the world. So we are heading to Japan for the week leading up to the match at the National Stadium there, where we'll be talking to a number of leading figures in Japanese rugby, just to understand a little bit more about the game in Japan, about how it sees itself, what's going on there, because we really don't see a lot or don't really understand a lot about Japanese rugby, and certainly its role in the global game. And really, when you think about it, now is the third largest market in our sport. We really do want to have a number of interesting conversations with people such as Will Genia. Hopefully, get to Steve Hansen, Koji Tokamatsu, one of the geniuses behind the great success of the 2019 World Cup, and Glenn Delaney, hoping obviously to talk to Eddie Jones. We might see if we can get to talk to Werner Dern. So there are a lot of people up there that we do want to talk to, and so we'll be bringing you that content for each day of that time leading up to that important match in Tokyo. But certainly lots to look forward to. And Eddie Jones, just one more game before you go. The match against South Africa in Wembley. Obviously, the Brighton Miracle was the Brighton Miracle. You're not playing there again, although I understand that it was planned that you might be able to go back to play there, but the Brighton football team perhaps are playing there that day. How is the team, or how are you thinking about that big match against South Africa at Wembley?
Well, firstly, for the young team to be able to play against South Africa at Wembley is a historic occasion. You know, it's one of the most iconic football stadiums in the world. And they don't play. I think the last rugby game there was 2015. There's not a lot of rugby played there. You know, there's more Oasis played there than rugby. So we're looking forward to playing there. You know, it's obviously going to be a big task for us to compete against South Africa. We see South Africa blow away, teams like Argentina. So we're going to have to find a way to stick with them in the game. And again, it's not too different from Australia. We've got to find a way to make them a bit uncomfortable at the start of the game, stick with them, and you don't know what can happen. Because South Africa, I think have shown over the last two seasons to be the most dominant team in World Rugby at the moment, and there doesn't appear to be any letting up of that. Their forward pack's still as violent and as dominating as ever. They've added this mercurial movement of the ball in the back, so they've made them even more a dangerous team than they were before. And as we're speaking about that aerial contest, they're probably the best in the world at winning that aerial contest. So I thought New Zealand in the last test against Australia started poorly in that area and finished really well in that aerial contest, which they haven't been good at before, which then allowed them to win the game, relatively easily.
So interestingly, I wonder how much of 2015 is still resting with the South African, certainly with the South African fans that'll be there, and who knows, in the back of the minds they might want to have a get square. So certainly that'll be a great game to watch. And I'm really looking forward to seeing South Africa play against France in France. That's sort of the highlight, I think, for the Northern Test matches, the Autumn Series Test matches. So anyway, lots to look forward to in the weeks ahead. And yes, please stay tuned to Rugby Unity and for that special series of Rugby Unity podcast and content and everything else, all the social media stuff and everything else coming to you every day of the week leading up to that all-important test match between Japan and the Wallabies at the National Stadium in Tokyo. So, Eddie Jones, we'll let you get back to your day job. Thank you so much. Ewan Mackenzie is picking up trees, as I said, and we'll speak to you later in the week. We'll speak to you Monday to talk more about rugby. But for the moment, a very good bye to you and to you, the audience. Thank you once again for coming back. Please, liking, subscribing, participating. It's great to see so many of you involved, whether it's on TikTok, whether it's Instagram, however it is that you're consuming the Rugby Unity content. We're certainly very grateful for your support. So please, be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.